As the crisis in Iran continues, the death toll rises. Joining us now with the impact on the Iranian people, human rights attorney Gisoo Nia. Gisoo, good morning. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for having me on.
What started a few weeks ago with only a few hundred killed that was reported is now into the thousands. And because of the digital blackout that's still happening, it is very hard to confirm these numbers of how many were actually killed. What are you hearing, Gisoo, about the number of people who have died and been killed in Iran?
We are now past 300 hours of a communications blackout in Iran. The Islamic Republic of Iran has completely stopped the internet. So imagine people who are living outside of Iran, who have family inside the country, they've repeatedly seen their WhatsApps never be delivered. They don't know the fate of their family members. Finally, there is an hour or 2 hours a day where landlines are working or there's some internet connectivity that we're hearing in some places, and so people are finally getting reports about whether their family is alive or not. There are also Starlink terminals in the country, and so that's how we're actually getting our information, in the form of videos that show bodies piled up in morgues, or from testimonial accounts about what people saw on the street. The numbers initially, it's going to be hard to verify, of course. It's going to take months to do that kind of painstaking work. But what we're hearing is that there will at least be in the double-digit thousands numbers of people killed. And that's becoming a very credible estimate. We've heard from somebody in the Iranian government saying that there were 5,000 killed. Well, if they're saying that, history shows it's probably at least double that number, maybe triple. So it's going to take a few months, and the internet needs to come back on to be able to fully get the amount of videos that we need to substantiate this. But this is a massacre of epic proportions.
Yeah, you call it a massacre, Gisoo, and some are really calling this a genocide under a digital blackout. And the families that we have spoken to, that once they do actually get in touch, if they do with their family, everybody's so terrified and frightened that they don't speak on the phone. They just say everything's okay because they're so afraid people are listening in on the phone lines.
Absolutely. Landlines would have surveillance. So obviously, it's going to be a concern to be able to share any information openly, because then the regime might target those individuals. We already have reports of the regime trying to find who has Starlink, to be able to confiscate that and also detain those individuals. But what I would say is that what is really alarming is that if there's a number of 12,000 that Iran International, a diaspora media station, reported. If that number is true, and as I said, it may be much higher than that, if that number is true, the kill rate would be the same as the Rwandan genocide in the 1990s. And that was a mass atrocity that invigorated an entire global response and promises of this never happening again. So this is really unprecedented for Iran. We've had prior violent crackdowns on protests over the years, but nothing to this extent.
You talk about the global response, and we've talked about those who have died. We also know that more than how many thousand have been arrested. So many, I think I read somewhere over 300,000 injured. And those who are arrested, we know, Gisoo, Iran has a history, a documented history of torturing and executing their prisoners and many protesters. And we know that the president just said a few days ago that he was told those executions has stopped, the violence has stopped. Has it?
It has not. Different human rights groups, including Harana, a US-based group that tracks this quite closely, and also Iran Human Rights, a group that tracks executions, have all reported that there have been executions in the past few days. So it's not true that the executions have stopped. But more importantly, there has been a massive massacre that has occurred. So talking about, some executions that happened after the fact doesn't really address the fact that there was a mass atrocity crime, and that tens of thousands of people are reportedly killed. There's almost nobody that you speak to inside the country who either doesn't have somebody in their network who's been killed or injured, or who witnessed somebody be killed or injured. a colleague's sister reported seeing 3 boys shot in front of her in her neighborhood on one of the nights of the big
Yeah.
protests. So this is just a very typical sort of account that's coming out of the country, and that's why people are so fearful.
Gisu, I want to talk about that global support that you say is needed. We've heard a lot of European leaders over the past few days speaking out, saying that Iranians, the people, need to be helped. Could this be declared, really, the situation, a human rights disaster, and will they help?
Well, we saw that there was a moment of solidarity in the European Parliament and applause, for Iranian protesters and things like that. But what I want to see are concrete actions. Countries should be recalling their ambassadors to Iran. They should also be getting serious about accountability. There are reports of Islamic Republic of Iran officials moving their assets out of the country, seeking visas out of the country. All of that needs to be investigated, put a stop to, or there need to be arrest warrants in hand under universal jurisdiction frameworks, holding them accountable for crimes against humanity. We saw that the Islamic Republic of Iran foreign minister was invited to World Economic Forum at Davos.
Right.
Now, because the Iranian community, it was rescinded, but that shouldn't be happening.
Well, we're going to continue to watch this developing story and see what happens over the next few days. Gisu Nia, we appreciate your time here today. Thank you.